Hello and good day, Prime Minister Trudeau. My name is Jeffrey Ort, and I recently described the 5 murder attempts that Roseanne Williams used to punish me and to extort me during the 2 years that I was held captive in Beach Meadows, Nova Scotia. 2 years were a lot worse than murder attempts were done. I have in that video and others in this series referenced 2 attempts to kill my Uncle Larry, a man with advanced Huntington's. Roseanne tried to kill her husband twice during my captivity as leverage to force me to stay in Beach Meadows, to take care of him, to make sure he didn't die, so that she didn't have to take care of him. It's easy to forget in an individual video that I was held by 3 psychopaths, not just one, and all of them threatened to torture Roseanne until she killed Larry. From April 2017 to April 2019, Roseanne Williams threatened to kill her husband multiple times a day if I left or told anyone what was happening. She also threatened his murder for a near endless number of other infractions. Basically, anytime she didn't get what she wanted and no one was close by to hear what she would say. Only Karen and Wilhelmina knew that she was threatening to kill Larry. From April 2017 to May 2018, Karen threatened to torture her sister until she killed Larry. Karen threatened me with Larry's murder. Karen was demanding that I report Roseanne to the RCMP. Karen similarly claimed responsibility for torturing Roseanne until she committed my daily rapes and mutilations. Karen was similarly screaming at me that she wouldn't stop until I reported Roseanne to the RCMP. I had been forced into Karen's home for a year with the threat that Roseanne would kill Larry if I didn't go. I stopped going to Karen's. I jeopardized Larry's life in May of 2018 when Karen abused her own granddaughter to such an extent that I would endanger Larry to protect my niece. It was Karen's goal at that time to provoke a fight between my sister and I to cover up her own fentanyl addiction. In October of 2018, Wilhelmina threatened to torture Roseanne into killing Larry for the 10-day period from when Wilhelmina found out about the death threats and the starvation, until Wilhelmina successfully forced Roseanne to move into her house. It took Wilhelmina 10 days with 2 pieces of information to break Roseanne and force her to move into her house. It's what Wilhelmina had wanted all along. Wilhelmina had been screaming since 2017 that she was responsible for everything, and she wouldn't stop until Roseanne came home and looked after her mother. And the moment Roseanne moved into Wilhelmina's house and began to look after her mother, Wilhelmina stopped everything else. She tortured Roseanne even more viciously than ever before, but Larry and Dennis and I were left alone. Wilhelmina continued to torture Roseanne every second of every day until Roseanne was caught beating Larry in front of the housekeepers in March of 2019. Karen pounced on this and tortured Roseanne into moving back into her own house. Wilhelmina was instantly furious. She had lost what she had wanted all along, and she took it out on Dennis and Larry and I by threatening to have Roseanne kill Larry if I didn't make Roseanne return to Wilhelmina's home. These were all threats. Roseanne's first actual attempt to kill her husband was July of 2018. Roseanne had stopped providing all food and money in April of 2018, demanding that I provide all of the food and money as a means of paying her back for the $5,000 that she had lied and told my siblings Dennis had sent me. This ruse only lasted until I refused to go to Karen's again in late May. Roseanne was vacationing with my sister, who was visiting from Switzerland, and didn't return until July of 2018 to deal with me for refusing to go to Karen's over the incident with my niece. Roseanne was threatening to take Larry's food away, as she had always done. This occurred at every meal that Roseanne attended. But Roseanne had been gone for a long time. And Larry got frustrated and upset and simply told her to fuck off. That she couldn't take his food away because Jeffrey brought him food. She couldn't take his food away because she hadn't lived in the house for a year. And Larry mumbled this through mouthfuls of food while Roseanne beat me at the table. Roseanne went instantly nuclear, screaming and clawing and scratching and spitting and trying to get at Larry. Later that night, during her nightly screaming sessions in her own home, when she could scream threats without fear of anyone overhearing them, Roseanne ordered me to starve Larry. I refused. so she threatened to kill him if I was ever seen with food of my own. Her threat, her actions, were that I couldn't have food until I starved Larry. I told Roseanne no. I brought Larry 5 meals a day, including baked goods, every day of my entire captivity. Roseanne screamed endlessly that I would run out of food and money soon, and then Larry would starve. Roseanne screamed that when Larry was starving, he would be hungry enough that he would get into food he knew he wasn't supposed to have, and he'd get into things that he would choke to death on. Roseanne screamed that if I didn't starve Larry a little bit, that he would become hungry enough to look for food in the middle of the night, that he would fall down the way he had in 2016, that he would fall down the stairs and kill himself. I continued to provide Larry with all the food he wanted, 5 meals a day, plus baked goods, and I did this with no visible income and no help from anyone else. Roseanne went insane trying to figure out where the food was coming from. She didn't have the perspective to realize that I was going to the food bank every day. Roseanne grew angrier and more violent. Karen and Wilhelmina were tormenting and torturing her over this whole food issue, about Larry explaining what he had to eat every day when Roseanne said he didn't eat every day. Roseanne was screaming increasingly that she would give Larry food to make him choke so that I would be blamed for his death. Roseanne increasingly screamed that she would throw him downstairs to make it look like he fell while he was looking for food. Roseanne threatened every way you can imagine to kill her husband and make it look like my fault because he was looking for food. From August 2018, Roseanne Williams regularly searched her home, the one that Larry and I stayed in while she lived at the cottage. She searched it and stole any food she found. At the end of August, she stole nearly 3 weeks of food bank donations, and I was forced to go to the food bank as an emergency applicant on a Saturday to get Larry food. That's when I switched to caching food in the woods, as my grandfather had taught me when I was a child, as I was regularly starved as a child and had learned many things from my grandfather about feeding myself. Roseanne never let up. Karen never let up. Wilhelmina never let up. And Roseanne lost every round of every battle of every war. Roseanne was screaming to the very last minute I was in her house on April 22nd, 2019, that she would starve Larry to death, that she would kill him by having him choke to death, or she would kill him by having him fall, and that she would blame me. In January of 2019, Roseanne tried her second attempt to kill Larry. It ran concurrently with the first attempt. This is in addition to the starvation. And this attempt is too long, and it has too many milestones to explain every one. Roseanne was being tortured unusually aggressively by her sister and her mother from January to April, in large part due to the starvation and food issue that only the 3 or 4 of us knew about. Dennis and Tammy, while they may have suspected something, did not openly know that Larry was being starved, that Roseanne was trying to starve Larry, that I was being starved, and that Roseanne was actively trying to kill her husband. Roseanne was being tortured unusually aggressively during this time period and became so angry at one supper in mid-January that she took a swing at her husband. She hadn't done it in a long time, and she'd never taken a swing at his head before. Larry zigged when he should have zagged, and Roseanne struck him full in the face with an open hand. Larry's head rang like a gong in front of Tammy, my Uncle Dennis's partner. In the past, Roseanne had always been careful that Tammy saw the barest minimum of the beatings. This was not that. Larry spent the rest of the evening with 3 finger welts across his face. Roseanne was so embarrassed by what she'd done in front of Tammy that she blamed Larry, blamed his Huntington's chorea, the jerky movements that he has, and she began poisoning Larry with extra meds, especially his risperidone, which was meant to control those very movements. She was screaming all through the rest of January that it was all Larry's fault. that he wasn't taking enough of his medications, that his Huntington's was getting worse, and this was met in counterpoint to Roseanne screaming all the time that Larry was faking his Huntington's to make her look crazy. Roseanne didn't live in her house, and she wouldn't come in the mornings to give Larry his regular pills, and she wouldn't come in the evenings to give Larry his regular pills. But she showed up at 3 or 4 o'clock every day to poison Larry with extra risperidone. And that turned Larry into a zombie in a week. That was a week of Roseanne screaming at every supper that I was refusing to give Larry his meds, while I tried to quietly explain to the family that Larry was being poisoned. That I gave Larry his prescribed meds morning and night, and that Roseanne came to the house purely to poison him so that he would be a zombie at supper because Roseanne had accidentally hit him a week earlier. The impact on Larry was almost immediate. He began sleeping more and more as the risperidone took effect. He had been sleeping longer than usual since Roseanne took his dog away from him. The dog lived at Wilhelmina's with Roseanne and Dennis. The extra risperidone pushed Larry's sleep cycle to 16 hours a day. He would get up once or twice to go to the washroom, but otherwise he slept until 2 or 3 in the afternoon when Roseanne would wake him up to take his risperidone, and he would stay awake long enough to eat supper and then go to bed. Larry was a zombie and looked like death by the second week. The entire second week was Roseanne screaming that Larry was faking his Huntington's again, while also claiming that I wasn't giving him his meds, while also claiming that she was giving him extra meds because his Huntington's had gotten so severe. Roseanne was screaming at the supper table every night that I was lying about foods, lying about meds, that Larry and I were both in cahoots to make her look crazy. Larry continued to be poisoned every day. I continued to quietly explain to the family he was being poisoned every day, and every day Larry looked worse. His health declined quickly enough that I wanted to take him to a doctor or a hospital, which is when Roseanne began screaming that he was faking and that she wasn't sitting in an ER for 12 hours because he was faking, and that I wasn't to dare take him to a hospital or a doctor because he was faking. That was at the supper table. When she came to her home at night after Larry had gone to bed, she simply screamed that she would kill him outright if I took him to a doctor or took him to a hospital. She screamed that she wasn't going to stop with the medications, she wasn't going to stop with the starvation, she wasn't going to stop with any of the rape and the mutilation and the beatings and anything else that was going on. She wasn't going to stop until I starved Larry and gave him the extra meds myself. There was a week prior to February 19th where Roseanne would scream almost entirely, where Roseanne would scream for almost the entire meal that it was my turn to watch Larry die. It's your turn to watch him die. An entire week of that, while screaming that he was faking his Huntington's, while screaming that his Huntington's had gotten worse, while screaming that I was lying about food and meds and everything else. It gets hard to keep track of everything Roseanne was screaming when she was trying to kill Larry this time. But Larry continued to get sicker and sicker. And for a week I was forbidden from taking him to a doctor, and Larry continued to get sicker. So on February 19th, 2019, I drove Karen to Bridgewater and left her at her appointment so that I could run a personal errand. I never told anyone what it was. I spent almost 2 hours explaining as little as possible about me and as much as possible about Larry and medications and being poisoned to the Bridgewater courthouse. They had given me a justice of the peace to help me with paperwork. And I left with the paperwork for a restraining order, an emergency protection order, and the beginnings of the paperwork to take emergency custody of Larry myself. Our plan, the JP and I worked this out together. Our plan was for me to take Larry to the hospital when Roseanne wasn't around. And if she found out, and if she showed up at the hospital, and if she tried to take him away before he could see doctors, then I had the paperwork to stop her and take custody of Larry. It would only take one phone call to the RCMP and one phone call to the courthouse to do that. I really didn't want to do that. On February 22nd, Roseanne had left for the weekend. It was a Friday. Larry was so sick that he couldn't chew or swallow. His entire throat and jaw were seized shut. And I was worried that if he didn't choke to death or drown, that he would suffocate. Roseanne was gone for that weekend. So I took him to the Liverpool hospital and found that the wait room was enormous. There was at least 35 or 36 people in that room. But as the waits are always enormous, it was likely to be half that, as people would come with company. I talked my way through triage and into the actual ER department. I'd left Larry in the truck. I spoke to the RNs and the doctors and explained as briefly as I could my circumstances, and they advised me to take him home and then call an ambulance, that an ambulance ride from his residence would get him into the ER faster. I drove Larry home. I walked through the door. I picked up the phone when Roseanne ran in behind me and slammed the phone down, screaming that Wilhelmina had called her and told her that I took Larry to the hospital after Roseanne had forbidden it. I told Roseanne everything I'd done. I left out Bridgewater and left out the paperwork, but I told her everything I'd done at the hospital, so that everyone in the ER, everyone in the waiting room, everyone in the hospital that night knew that Larry Williams was sick. Roseanne flew into a rage and took Larry back to the hospital. She got back very late that night. Larry did indeed have a severe bladder infection and a severe cold. Roseanne had said nothing about poisoning him with extra risperidone. She took the time while she was at the hospital to write my older sister a message, telling my older sister how lucky Larry was that Roseanne had caught his illnesses, that no one in Beach Meadows was paying attention to him, that no one was looking after him. Roseanne was given cold meds and antibiotics for Larry's bladder infection and his cold. The cold meds, combined with the risperidone, put Larry in a near coma. He was now sleeping 20 hours a day, getting up only to use the washroom and to go for supper. The antibiotics and cold meds were only for a week, and when they were done, Roseanne was so satisfied, so smug with having a comatose husband, that she poisoned Larry with extra risperidone and extra strength cold medication every day to keep him nearly catatonic for the next 2 months, all of February and all of March. In retaliation for me taking Larry to the hospital, Roseanne Williams beat me until my shoulder dislocated on February 23, 2019. Roseanne knew this was the shoulder that I had injured in Malaysia in a motorcycle accident, and she had attacked me that way in the past, on April 22, 2017. I was beaten again until my shoulder dislocated on March 19th. This took place in Wilhelmina's driveway when I took 3 potatoes from Dennis in order to finish making Larry's lunch. My shoulder was dislocated twice in less than a month because Roseanne was angry over food. Roseanne continued to poison her husband with multiple medications, and she was furious about the potato incident. She grew so angry that only a few days later, on March 22, 2019, in a fit of anger, she beat Larry in front of her housekeepers, slamming him into the kitchen table repeatedly while she yelled at him and yelled at the housekeepers. Karen found out about this and instantly twisted it into a torture so extreme that Roseanne not only stopped poisoning Larry, but was forced to move back into her own house on April 1, 2019. Larry's sleep cycle went back to his normal within a couple of days of the extra risperidone and extra cold meds being removed from his diet.